But first, former President Donald Trump continues to perpetuate his big lie about election fraud. He is still claiming it was stolen from him. Video surfaced of him addressing a crowd at Mar-a-Lago last Wednesday in which he talks about the Republican-led recount that is currently underway in Arizona's Maricopa County. He lost the county by more than 2 points, but told the crowd, quote, "Watch Arizona. Some very interesting things are happening. Take a look."
Let's see what they find. I wouldn't be surprised if they found thousands and thousands and thousands of votes. So we're going to watch that very closely. And after that, you'll watch Pennsylvania and you'll watch Georgia and you're going to watch Michigan and Wisconsin and you're watching New Hampshire. They found a lot of votes up in New Hampshire just now. You saw that?
No.
Yeah,
None of those states are in dispute. And I mean, while it's kind of pitiful to see him on patios at Mar-a-Lago, just looping on all of this, there is a strain of this that is dangerously still alive, Joe.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Dangerously still alive. Dangerously still alive. Charlie Sykes, you look at that video and it's pathetic and sad that a former president is going in the middle of receptions and just talking to random people.
And meandering around.
Lying to them. And lying to them based on what federal judges that he appointed said was actually the reality. But I read a Washington Post article this morning where somebody said, well, of course we believe him because Donald Trump has always been right. And we're going to get to what's happening with Mitt Romney a little bit later. We're going to get to what's happening with the Texas runoff a little bit later. But in every case, this party, as sad and pathetic and really just as stupid as he looks, the truth is there is an entire nation of Republicans that are blindly following this corrupt, just terrible man.
It was pitiful, it was pathetic, and it was ludicrous. And I can't help thinking, look at that video and imagine that millions of people, including the leadership of the Republican Party, look at him and go, yes, that's our leader. That is our future. This is the man that we want to put back in the Oval Office. It is this bizarre moment where the Republican Party looks at that picture and says, yeah, this is our guy. And anybody that breaks with him, whether it's Mitt Romney or Liz Cheney, we have to throw them out. And believing this lie has now become a litmus test in the Republican Party. It is now required that you do this. And the Republican Party is in the process of purging people that are willing to challenge the big lie and that are telling the truth about what happened. It's an extraordinary moment, Joe. And I say that having lived through the last 5 years of watching the derangement of the Republican Party, and now to watch what appears to be the acceleration of the derangement of the Republican Party.
Charlie, though, we focus an awful lot, as we should, on the Kevin McCarthys and the others who know that Donald Trump is a joke and who will tell anybody that will listen to them off the record that they know that Donald Trump is a joke. But they have no choice. What are they going to do? If they want to be speaker, if they want to win their elections, they've got to follow Donald Trump. But what about all the people that we've known through the years? The rank and file people, our friends, our family members, party members, officials, people that helped get me elected, who claimed at one time to actually be conservatives, who actually claimed to believe at one time the same thing that you and I believe in small government. I feel like now's a great time to ask the question, what the hell has happened to them? And when do they leave? Is it the Nazi flag? Like when they carry the flag of the Third Reich around, do our friends go, well, if you've ever looked at the flag closely, it does have a snappy design and nice colors. At what point do they finally give up the ghost on this guy? Because we could go down the laundry list of things that he's done. We can talk about January the 6th. We can talk about the fact he was pressuring his attorney general to arrest, like a fascist thug, to arrest his political opponent and their family 2 weeks before the election. We could go down the laundry list of things that he's done that actually show that he is a fascist, and yet they keep following him.
Well, the response would be, of course, is, well, what about Antifa? What about Black Lives Matter? Because this has become internalized on the right, just the willingness to look the other way. But, and it's also interesting watching how with Donald Trump down there, in Mar-a-Lago on the patio, the thought leadership, to the extent there is any thought leadership at all on the right, it shifted to people like Tucker Carlson, who don't even pretend any longer not to be pushing white nationalist sorts of narratives. And so this is the really ugly moment where you have 70% of Republicans who believe the election was stolen, and there's no indication that's going to change. And look, I would like to be able to say to you, Joe, that if there was really stronger leadership among the people that you have described, if more people spoke out about this, that maybe there would be this moment of recognition. But we've seen this again and again and again, where the acquiescence and the rationalization have just become the norm now on the Republican side. So yes, and it is getting worse. And my concern is that as these ideas become normalized, as the right shrugs off accusations of racism and white nationalism and fascism, that in fact our politics is going to be changing in extraordinarily ugly ways.
Yeah, and I mean, there have been times in the past few weeks where media outlets, all of them, have had on, and I'm talking about news media outlets, have had on Republicans who support the big lie and have tiptoed around it just because they're so grateful to have a Republican on to talk about other things. I'm sorry. I think that's wrong. The press needs to ask the question. And if they can't come on to have the question asked, and it's not a question being asked for Democrats, it's a question being asked for our democracy. Do you stand on the side of our democracy? And if they can't come on a news program, whether it's a Sunday show or Morning Joe or anywhere, to talk about that, I don't know how you tiptoe around something like this.
Hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news, or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.